Hello and welcome to the year's first Steve and Dave's 50 years ago this month. This time we're going to be looking at the Billboard Hot 100 chart for January 13th, 1973. So Chief, you want to get us started?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's talk about what's number one in mid-January 1973, the Zapruder film of 45s. It's Carly Simon's "You're So Vain." This song has been poured over time and time again for at this point for generations. It clearly is Simon's high watermark as an artist, and this is also noteworthy because she penned the song. And so, I don't know that Simon never really came close to achieving anything like this ever again. She did get close to number one other time with "Nobody Does It Better." I think that was in 1977, but this is her lone number one. And I think more importantly, it's considered really one of the great songs of the 20th century. I don't think that's overstating it. It's a song that that many find almost inspiring on some level. There's a certain kind of feminist. I don't know if I'd go so far to say it's a feminist anthem, but there are certainly themes here of empowerment and anger that many people identify with. There's a lot of things happening here that make it really excellent. One, of course, is the production. She's working with Richard Perry at this point. Richard Perry in the early 1970s has the golden touch. He works with everyone from Ringo Starr to Harry Nilsson, a whole host of people.
Yeah.
And so you've got that. You've got also a kind of who's who of session players, including, I just want to mention the bubbling bass intro, which is quite distinctive. That's the one and the only Klaus Vormann of Beatles fame, the person who befriended the Beatles while they were in Hamburg, the person who inked the Revolver cover, and a fine
And
musician in his own
very
right.
nearly replaced Paul McCartney. I mean, I think the discussions along that line were well advanced because he got along with all of them, right? They all knew him. They all appreciated
he's a buddy.
his talent.
Yeah, for sure. No, he's a buddy, and a pretty strong session musician in his own right. So you've got a whole host of people here who are really contributing to make this song excellent. It comes from her. It comes from her LP "No Secrets," which is also a kind of a career achievement for her, which ends up peaking at number one on the US LP chart as well. It's really a kind of tour de force for Simon, but I guess we should get to the elephant in the room, and that is that it's always been, the question's always been, who's it about? And this is quite frankly something that Simon spurred along over the years. I suppose it didn't hurt sales on any level, and there was a kind of mystique that surrounded the song, and I think to some degree sort of surrounded her. And so over the years, she gave hints here and there. In fact, there was a time in the 70s where she would every year or so give out the letter of the name, one letter at a time. Oh God! She famously auctioned off at a charity auction the name of the person it's about, supposedly. I guess that was 2003, but the only stipulation was that the winner could not share the name. So over time, right? It's a number of figures have emerged as potential targets.
There's never been a definitive answer, right? There's never been the point where people say, "Oh yeah, it's got to be."
Right. Yeah, I'm Carly Simon, and this song is about. That's never happened. So again, a half century later, there's still sort of this mystery. Many people have suggested it's Warren Beatty. There was a time when people thought
that's my favorite.
Yeah. Some have suggested it's Mick Jagger. This is really sort of the one person she's come out on record saying that it's not Mick Jagger.
Well, the interesting thing about that, of course, is that he's singing background.
He's singing background, and we'll hear him.
A strange thing to have him do if he were the person that she was singing about.
Somehow, I could see Mick doing that. But you're right. I hear what you're saying. Chris Christopherson has been another. I mean, and then other people who are more in the know have suggested it's kind of an amalgam of people that she, had relationships. Cat Stevens is also another possible candidate. It's the point is that it's really quite an interesting song, great lyrics. And one of the things that I think makes the song terrific is the orchestration. And so this is Simon's doing as well. So she put together the orchestration, but leading the orchestra was a guy by the name of Paul Buckmaster. And we've talked about Buckmaster before. He is in terms of pop orchestration, he is sort of the main man at this point.
Go-to guy, yeah.
Go-to guy. Everything about it is excellent. Any list of the 20th century puts You're So Vain near the top of it's one of the most important songs of the century. And again, it's a high watermark for Carly Simon. So there we have it. At number two, we've got Stevie Wonder, the amazing Superstition.
Yeah, this came from his 15th studio album, Talking Book. It was the lead single from that, which also produced You Are the Sunshine of My Life, and of course, with singles like that, driving sales, it became his first #1 album, also the first in a series of incredible successes throughout the 70s and beyond. But in the 70s, he was smoking hot.
Absolutely.
Of course, Stevie Wonder wrote this himself, although I think it would be more than fair to say it's a collaboration of sorts.
Yeah, that's right.
With Jeff Beck. Jeff Beck had been an admirer of Stevie Wonder's for quite a time. And when Stevie Wonder heard that, he thought, well, maybe we'll bring him in for the next project. And so that's what he did for Talking Book. And interestingly enough, perhaps the main contribution from Beck for this song was the intro percussion part, the drums.
Right. That's right.
That was his suggestion. And legend would have it that he just played that for Stevie, and Stevie just started to kind of improvise.
Yes.
And start coming up with riffs for it and things like that. And supposedly this was a nearly spontaneous production. Just
right. So the story goes, that's exactly it.
Just going from the drums and going from there. Yeah, the rest, as they say, is history.
Yeah, for sure.
Part of the agreement was Beck would come in and work with him on this album, and in exchange, Stevie would write a song for him. Yeah. And this was it. They decided that he would get Superstition, and this was going to be the song. He was supposed to be able to put this out first, because he had just formed a new group after the Jeff Beck group broke up. The power trio Beck, Bogert, and Appice.
Yeah.
And that's with the bassist Tim Bogert and the drummer Carmine Appice.
Yeah.
But their debut album took a little bit of time, going into months, and it was not being released. And especially because Berry Gordy was saying, look, Superstition, that's going to be a huge hit. And it can drive sales of your album. Just go ahead and put it out.
Yeah.
So that's what happened. And so by the time Beck put it out, it was a cover of Stevie's song.
That's right. Yeah.
Wonder actually debuted this song live, opening for the Stones in the summer of 1972.
Now that would have been a concert, right?
That
talk about your double bills. Yeah.
Yeah. Now this song peaked at #1 and it was of course, number one on the soul singles chart. It was his first number one since Fingertips Part 2 in 1973, which he had recorded as a 12-year-old.
Right. So we're talking about a decade, right?
Basically, a solid decade between number one hits. Not that he wasn't getting the hits in. His production during the 70s, during the 60s, would have been the envy of most artists, right?
Oh, absolutely. No, that's right.
He was producing hit after hit. They just weren't going all the way to the top. And he had stuff in the 60s like Uptight, For Once in My Life, My Cherim Amour, Signed, Sealed, Delivered. So this stuff was all going on. It wasn't like he was going through a dry spell.
Far from it. That's right.
And these were just some of the bigger ones. So he was charting all the time throughout the 60s. I should mention, in addition to Stevie, the producers of this album and of this song, Malcolm Cecil and Robert Margouleff. Was released October 24th, 1972 on the Tamla label of Motown. And it has, of course, become part of his huge hit repertoire. And Rolling Stone ranked the song in all of its 500 greatest songs of all time charts.
Oh,
And the first one was number 74 in 2004. In 2010, it moved up one to number 73. And in the 2021 list, it shot up with a bullet to number 12. So clearly, Rolling Stones loves it, but they're not the only ones.
No, they're not. No, they're not.
Now, the band on this, Stevie Wonder, by this point in his career, was playing most of the instruments in his songs himself.
That's right.
And in this one, he not only had the lead vocals, but he was also doing the Hohner clavinet, drums, the Moog bass. Apart from Beck, the people worth mentioning are Trevor Lawrence on saxophone, tenor saxophone, and Steve Madio. Now, both of these guys on trumpet, they worked together a lot in various horn sections for the Stones and so on, for all sorts of groups. Lawrence was also an arranger and a producer in his own right. He collaborated on Etta James' third album, Etta James, and he arranged and co-produced the Pointer Sisters' 1982 album, So Excited. He also produced Nilsson's 13th studio album, That's the Way It Is, with his wife doing a duet with Nilsson. His wife being, and now her name, Lawrence, one of the Supremes.
Oh, well.
And I'm just blanking on the name at the moment, but yeah. So he was also a very, very busy guy, right?
For sure.
And,
yeah.
So we have a lot of people with a lot of talent working on a song that really showed it off to the best of its.
It's really interesting, and this is right, and this is also Wonder at his most experimental. Wonder is very interested in, as you're suggesting, synthesizers. He spent some time with the synthesizer experts and inventors, and again, he plays the hell out of the clavinet. I mean, between Stevie Wonder, Garth Hudson of the band, Billy Preston as well. I mean, the clavinet is becoming sort of the instrument of choice, and this is Wonder at his most, in many ways, his most adventurous. And I think I mean, you tell me this had a tremendous crossover appeal. Many
Yeah.
Wonder songs did, but there's something about Superstition that really broke open a whole new audience for him.
Well, and I think that was intentional. I think that's part of the reason that he was opening for the Stones,
Yes.
to kind of widen his audience there. But let's go ahead and listen to this. There's so much interesting stuff going on here musically. It's really worth a listen. Okay. So yeah,
That's just
great
that's
horns, drums, the rhythm
absolutely.
section, fantastic. Everything's just,
No, there's this. I mean, there are songs and there are songs. There's just a kind of touch of genius across the board here. And that opening, it's so interesting. You can hear some of the tasty chops from Jeff Beck early on. And as we record this in mid-January of 2023, Jeff Beck has just passed away, and it's so interesting. He's such a versatile artist. Of course, starting in the Yardbirds and then going out on his own, famously. It's Jeff Beck could play anything, and what's so fascinating is that he was drawn to so many different types of music. This is just entering the period in Jeff Beck's career where he's becoming much more interested in fusion. In the mid 70s, then he'll record Blow by Blow and Wired, working with Sir George Martin. Both those albums, jazz fusion classics, and maybe some of the best work of his career. Beck is also at this point partnering with a guy by the name of Jan Hammer on keyboards. There's just something about Beck that is, he was endlessly curious, and he could fit in anywhere. And so he had this incredible kind of virtuosity, but he also then had the ability to sort of be an incredible supportive player. And so there's just, in praise of Jeff Beck, among other things.
Before we move on, I just wanted to ask you, do you remember, I think it was a Miller Lite commercial for the Super Bowl in 83, maybe? They used Superstition as the song for the commercial. Stevie Wonder himself played a type of voodoo witch doctor sort of thing. And people were coming and performing things for him in order to get like good luck charms for their team.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
I confess I don't remember this.
I don't remember it either. It sounds like it could have been really funny. Or
really offensive.
Conceivably also just a real loser, but
I don't know it. But Stevie Wonder is entering his imperial phase. It's just, he's just, if it's the 70s and it's Stevie Wonder, it's going to be magnificent.
Oh, well, and of course, it almost goes without saying, he won Grammys for this.
Yeah, that's right.
Best song. I don't want to
Yeah, it's
But he won two Grammys: best rhythm and blues song and best R&B vocal performance male.
yeah,
This is it.
nice.
So,
It's magnificent. So at number two, then the great Stevie Wonder with Superstition.
indeed.
At number three, mid January of 1973, we talked about this song last month, but it's Billy Paul's "Me and Mrs. Jones." It's Billy Paul's, of course, high watermark, and it's its frankness is still kind of jarring, yeah, some 50 years later, but it's a terrific song. At number four, then you have Elton John's "Crocodile Rock," and this is okay. So this is one of the songs in the Elton John canon. I don't think there's much doubt about that. It peaks, of course, at number one. It is, however, a song that, while I think his fans adore, and have long adored, it's a song that he's not particularly fond of. It is, of course, a song about the 50s, the early days of rock and roll, about love and loss. It's pretty conventional in terms of its lyrics. Toppin's lyrics here are, they're kind of evocative, but they're also almost trite. And this is unusual for Toppin, who's oftentimes pretty adventurous with language. And it's less so here, I think. It is a kind of a conventional number, but it, like, Elton John songs of this era, I mean, it has a kind of touch of magic to it. And his band, the famed Elton John band of Dee Murray on bass, Nigel Olsson on drums, and David Johnstone on guitar, are of course, at peak of their powers.
Well, and it's got an undeniable energy, and it's hard
Sure.
not to go with it. In terms of the theme, we're right at the beginning of a big wave of 50s nostalgia.
That's absolutely right.
Right, and it started with like Lucas and American.
Yeah, American Graffiti.
American Graffiti,
Yeah,
going to become Happy Days.
that's
Ron
right.
Howard in the middle of all that stuff.
That's exactly right. You've got groups like Sha Na Na, who exploded out of Woodstock, and at this point, Sha Na Na, they have a weekly syndicated television show in the United States, and so there is a kind
Playing
of
Madison
50s
Square
fever.
Garden with John and Yoko and stuff like that. Yeah.
Well, it doesn't get much stranger than that, but right. And so there is. You're absolutely right. This is sort of peak. There's a kind of peak 50s nostalgia at work here, and certainly the song kind of kicks into it and ties into it very well. But it's, it's just one of those songs that both John and Toppin talk about it as it's kind of derivative, kind of playful, kind of joyously derivative, but derivative nonetheless, and certainly is a far less adventurous number than many of the songs that Elton John is even charting with at this time. Now, it comes from John's "Don't Shoot Me, I'm Only the Piano Player" LP, which, like most Elton John albums in the 1970s, peaks at number one on the LP chart as well. And so it's there's a lot happening here that's it's interesting. Now, one of the things that is noteworthy about this particular song is John's playing and singing. So Elton John, they were looking for a crappy organ sound. They thought that would really sort of top it off, and they ended up identifying the Farfisa organ. The Farfisa organ was an organ that some players really, really enjoyed working with. A guy by the name of Spooner Oldham of Muscle Shoals Swamper fame, session musician in northern Alabama. If you listen to songs that came from Muscle Shoals in the late 1960s, you're going to hear a lot of the Farfisa organ. Famously, I guess the most famous Farfisa organ sound would have come from Sam the Sham and the Pharaohs with "Wooly Bully," which is, and so there's that. It's a kind of tinny, I don't know how best to describe it, but it's distinctive, but also kind of campy at the same time. It's perfect for this song. Also, Elton John, who was a very strong vocalist at this point, very effective vocalist in the early 70s, is singing falsetto at the end. And so it's, in a way, a kind of tour de force for John in terms of his vocal stylings, that the song, people love it, but they're not as fond of it as, well, they're just not that fond of it, I think, to be fair. again, it peaks at number 1 in the United States. It peaks at number 5 in the UK. And we should.
I think it
yeah,
makes for. I think it makes for a really excellent mix in Greatest Hits anthology. It was in his Greatest Hits number 1.
Yes, it was. That's
And
right.
yeah, it fits in there very well.
One wonders if there's been a concert of the past 50 years where he hasn't had to play it too. I mean, but you're right. I mean, it's there. It's part of the Elton John canon. And so with that, we should listen to a little bit of it here. We'll listen to the end where we can hear the organ and again John's falsetto. There you go. Yeah, so back to Course by the Elton John Band, namely Davy Johnstone on guitar. It's a well-crafted song, produced, of course, by Gus Dunnigan, who's handling all the production at this point. You have it at number 4, Elton John's Crocodile Rock. Number 5, you've got a new duo, a relatively new duo of Kenny Loggins and Jim Messina. And the song is Your Mama Don't Dance. And a lot of affection for this song. There's a narrative here that's just irresistible. And the duo itself had, they had some success in the 70s. Now, it's really interesting when you think about Loggins and Messina. You've got Jim Messina, who was at the time was really sort of the star. He was the person who sort of in charge of the duo. He was actually a person looking for a partner, in a way.
A junior partner.
A junior partner. I think that's fair. Junior partner. Messina is sort of the king of poor timing. Messina was in Buffalo Springfield near the end of it. So basically when Neil Young was leaving the band, Jim Messina was entering the band. Timing is everything. Jim Messina was also in Poco, which was a very interesting band. Richie Furay was in Poco, Rusty Young. And he helped record the first album, which was really well received and still is considered a kind of critical's darling. But he left the band before the first album was released and didn't participate in Poco in any way. And so, as we know, right, Poco was the farm team for the Eagles, famously. And who's to say that Jim Messina wouldn't have somehow ended up in that? Who knows? But he left Poco as well. And so he's casting about for a kind of junior partner. He is working. He finds himself linked to a singer-songwriter, Kenny Loggins, who is the staff writer at ABC Dunhill. He's working with Loggins on his first album. They get along reasonably well, and they decide to create a kind of duo. And so during the early 70s, Loggins and Messina do chart a couple of times. The Mama Don't Dance peaks at number 4, by far their biggest hit, but they also have My Music at number 16.
Danny song.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. That's right. Kenny Loggins' number, as well as Thinking of You.
Well, I think Anne Murphy had a bigger hit with Danny's song, but
yeah, that's right. Anne Murray had a much bigger hit, but but Loggins and Messina were on the radio. They sold a lot of albums, and they were considered a kind of country rock duo with kind of ambitious. I mean, some of their cuts are Watching the River Run. A number of songs here are really quite
corner or something like that.
That's right. And so there's a lot of affection for them now. They split in 75, and their careers go drastically different ways. Messina continues to record, but Loggins becomes a kind of he becomes a huge star in the 1980s. He first catches notice with in the late 1970s, but by the time we get to the 1980s, he puts together 5 top 10 singles, including number 1, 1984, Footloose. And Kenny Loggins, I mean, in many ways, Kenny Loggins is one of the great 80s stars.
Soundtrack guy.
Soundtrack guy, yeah. Also, it's in the Top Gun soundtrack.
Yes.
And so Kenny Loggins becomes a star. And
he kind of had he kind of had the right vibes for the California rock, for the yacht music type of thing that was going on
Sure.
in the late 70s and
Yeah,
early
that's right.
80s,
No,
right?
that's fair.
An attractive guy.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah, so he had sort of that kind of the looks and all of that. It's fair to say that I think it's fair to say that there wasn't a tremendous rapport between the two. They worked together, but I don't know that they were nevertheless, in the 21st century, they've regrouped a couple of times to both record and to tour. But I think it's fair to say for Jim Messina, this was, again, sort of his high water mark. What's not to love? Little ode to a little nod to the Everly Brothers there, but it's yeah. So it's a fun song, and it is by far their most popular. So at number 5, Loggins and Messina with "Your Mama Don't Dance." Now,
I just want to just about this cover that you just showed. Do you think this is the sort of thing that eats at egos? It's like, why is he in front of me in this? I mean, with Simon and Garfunkel, it's clear, because if he's in back of me, nobody's going to see him. But it's like, why do they have the kid up front? Why is he the one who's? I just imagine I see
think
things like this. And I just imagine, oh man, I wonder if that was not like.
Undoubtedly, I think this was. I mean, it's not hard to imagine that. It's not hard to imagine Jim Messina feeling sort of overlooked in this whole deal. Who becomes the breakout star? Well, the kid becomes the breakout star. It's Jim Messina kind of does the kid a solid, early on, and then next thing you know, so it's but I could see that. I definitely could see that. At number 6, then you have a kind of a longtime favorite in a way. And it's Johnny Rivers, who
just love this song, man.
And it's the Rockin' Pneumonia,
Rockin' Pneumonia, and the Boogie Woogie Flu. This was written back in the late 50s by Huey Piano Smith, and Johnny Vincent. Huey Piano Smith and his Clowns were the first to record it, and it was kind of a play on an actual sickness that was going around, the walking pneumonia and the Asian flu. So from the walking pneumonia, we get the rocking pneumonia. And I don't think that there's a bad version of this song. I don't think it's possible. I just think it rocks. It's so much fun. But the Johnny Rivers version is my favorite. And Johnny Rivers was in and around the charts from the late 50s well into the 70s. This was an international hit for him, peaked at number 6 here in the Billboard Hot 100. But it was his 5th highest charting song, and it spent a longer time on the chart, 19 weeks, than any of his other 24 hits to that date. It would become his 3rd gold record. His first was a cover of Chuck Berry's Memphis.
Yes. Right.
Oh, and I'm afraid I don't have the second one right off the top of my head, but he was charting a lot. He was a songwriter. He was a singer. And strangely, after he had decided that he would never make it as a singer, some of his greatest success was covering other people's stuff.
Yeah.
And this is one example of that. His last gold record would be 5 years later, in 1977, with Slow Dancing, Swaying to the Music.
Oh yeah, that's a terrific song.
Now, this came from his 8th studio album, L.A. Reggae, and had a lot of the usual suspects from the Wrecking Crew, right? You had Joe
Sure.
Osborne on bass.
Yes.
Jim Gordon on drums, Gary Coleman percussion, Jim Horn on sax, Dean Park and Larry Carlson on guitar, and Chuck Findlay on trumpet. Don't want to ignore his contributions, but above all, this kind of honky tonk piano that's going on there is you're my favorite, Larry Knechtel. The man was everywhere.
Yes, he was. Tremendous talent.
And just without his piano on this song, it would be half as much.
Yeah, it makes the song. It's fantastic. Right? Yeah.
So let's give that a listen. Okay. Yeah.
That's Larry Knechtel's song. Come on.
You can see why they didn't want to get that off of the charts too early. It's just I just loved it every time it came on the radio. It was just ready to rock out.
That's terrific number. It's a terrific number for sure. So at number 6, you've got Rockin' Pneumonia and Boogie Woogie Flu from Johnny Rivers. Number 7, mid-January 1973, is the Gilbert O'Sullivan's Clair, which is we talked about this last month. It's a cloying little number, but
it's nice.
Oh, it's nice enough. It's fine. Okay, so Gilbert O'Sullivan with Clair. At number 8, then you have Curtis Mayfield with the title track from the soundtrack, Superfly. Superfly is, by many measures, it's really one of the more important LPs of the 1970s, and this particular song is the second charting, right? It's the second charting single. First, of course, being "Freddie's Dead," which we also talked about, I guess, last month. Right. Curtis Mayfield is significant artist of the 1970s. He gets his start really early in the earliest sort of years of rock and roll. He starts a group called The Impressions with a guy by the name of Jerry the Iceman Butler. And The Impressions are a really important group in the 50s into the 1960s. In fact, The Impressions are part of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. This is in both Butler and Mayfield entered as members of The Impression. Mayfield himself had a bit of a star-crossed life, though. Once we move out of the 1970s, he was paralyzed in a stage accident in 1990. Rigging came on top of him and paralyzed him for the next stem. Courageously, however, he continued to record up until his death in 1999. But I think Mayfield is best remembered for Superfly, which was the film, of course, was a blaxploitation film, quite popular in the day. But the soundtrack has become again a kind of almost a kind of documentary piece of life on the streets for Black America. I mean, it's an album that really takes on issues of violence, drug abuse, relationships gone bad. I mean, it's a pretty rough album, and takes on these really important themes, but it's also funky as hell. And so Superfly, this particular cut, Superfly, has been heavily sampled over the years and is really, I think, for many people, incredibly well known, although wouldn't necessarily be able to recognize the song, but they would be able to recognize riffs from it. Superfly itself becomes important because it enters the vocabulary. Fly enters the vocabulary as something, kind of a fashion point of emphasis. Something is really fly, and even in the 21st century, fly it still exists as part of the language.
Pretty fly for a white guy.
Yeah, there we go. And so Mayfield put this together near the end of the sessions for Superfly, and it was going to be an instrumental, but it was at the last minute he crafted lyrics for it. And so when you hear Superfly, the lyrics are there, but they're really less important and less impressive than the score. The instrumentation it's really wild, and you can see why people have drawn bits and pieces of it over the year, because it really, really moves. And so let's listen to a little bit of Superfly now. There we go. Mayfield's Superfly, which is, again, the height of his powers, and probably the thing that he's best remembered for, right? I mean, I think we'd agree with that. This is Mayfield's apex. So at number 9, then we have a really interesting song, a kind of one-hit wonder, but one of the coolest songs from the 70s. It's just something about it it's marvelous. And I can't say enough about good things about it. It's Timmy Thomas's "Why Can't We Live Together?"
Yeah, Timmy Thomas had just moved to Florida and was watching some Vietnam coverage with Walter Cronkite, and they were mentioning he mentioned casualties.
Yeah.
So many deaths in this week, and he just thought, wow, well, in his own words, he says, quote, "What? You mean that many mothers' children died today? In a war that we can't come to the table and sit down and talk about this without so many families losing their loved ones?" I said, "Why can't we live together?" Bing, the light went off, and I started writing it then. No more wars. We want peace in this world, and no matter what color, you're still my brother. And then after that, put it on this little tape and went to WEBF, which was a local radio station, and they played local artists then. They played it, and the phones lit up. They said, "Man, who is that?" And I did it as a one-man band. That was my foot playing bass. That was my left hand playing guitar.
Oh, it's so awesome. Yeah.
Could never believe that as a one-man band, something like that would have been played that much. But I do believe that the world was ready to start changing a little bit, and that song made the change. All right. It is incredible. It defines low production, right?
Yes.
The crew on this production was Timmy Thomas on a Lowry organ with a bossa nova style percussion from an early rhythm machine. That was it. And just based on the unexpected and wild success of this, he went on to make the album "Why Can't We Live Together," which had mixed reviews, from really cold all the way to lukewarm. Rolling Stone hated it. Russell Gersten wrote, "It was a piece of junk." And he commented, quote, 30 minutes of listening to a hack organist and a metronome playing basically the same song in 8 variations is one of the most abrasive experiences I've undergone in months.
You know, it almost sounds like something Neil Young would try to pull off, but but that's right. So the album is junk, but that single there's a certain magic to it, and proudly lo-fi, right? The low production values are part of what make it so cool. It just feels like
some critics in retrospect say the album is amazingly good for what it is, and the music is kind of a post-punk, and he got everything out of it. For the fact that it was so low production and this was his working method, he did some amazing things with that. All right, that's not a recommendation for me to go and listen to the album, which I never have. But clearly there were critic voices that said Timmy Thomas is pretty close to genius.
Well, there is a certain genius to it. I mean, just the lo-fi characteristics of it are just, I think, charming, and the organ is just, oh my Lord, it's fantastic.
By the way, this was released August 1972 on the Glades label for TK Records, basically a local low budget record label. Distributed by Polydor, and it reached #1 on the R&B chart. It reached #3 on the Billboard Pop Singles chart. It eventually sold over 2 million copies. Now, of course, Timmy Thomas was a one-hit wonder, but it's just kind of amazing that he had a hit at all, considering what he was working with, and the fact that
agreed,
he was basically working with a very cheap home studio.
Yeah, agreed. There's something remarkable about it, and the backstory really helps to make. I mean, the song is super awesome, but the backstory then makes it even more remarkable.
It is remarkable. Let's go ahead and listen to it. Also amazing that, given the level of music production and what he's doing here, that so much of this single is dedicated to instrumentals.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, well,
Man.
I think we basically get the idea of what that's about, and
Oh yeah.
it's like,
It's again, right. Proudly lo-fi. Arguably one of my favorite songs of all time. That's at number 9 then. That's Timmy Thomas with Why Can't We Live Together? So again, the 70s are such an interesting decade musically because so many different styles come to the fore and then gets a degree of popularity. And well, number 10 was sort of I don't know, sort of defies explanation on some level. At number 5, you have "Oh Babe, What Would I Say" by Hurricane Smith. Now, Norman Hurricane Smith, who passed away in 2008, was a recording engineer. He was a recording engineer at EMI, which meant that he was working with great artists like the Beatles. And so Norman Smith recorded probably upwards of around 100 of the Beatles' early songs. The last LP that Smith worked on with the Beatles was the Rubber Soul LP. This also meant, of course, that Norman Smith at the time was also working alongside George Martin. And he was a kind of a pal. He was a kind of a pal of the Beatles. John Lennon nicknamed him Normal, which then became a title for Smith's autobiography. And he was a kind of laconic, placid, unflappable guy. So hence the name Hurricane, right? And so he's working at EMI. He also works with the early recordings of Pink Floyd. So it's Norman Smith at the controls for Puppies at the Gate of Dawn, Saucer Full of Secrets, Omagama. I mean, he's working with a lot of really interesting artists. He also has gets a recording bug, and he has a kind of pleasant voice. And his wife pens the song, "Oh Babe, What Would I Say?" Now, this is how do you categorize this song? It's old timey. It's almost kind of a vintage number. Almost sounds like something from the 20s. It almost has a kind of novelty quality to it. Yet there is a certain poignancy to it. It's a certain charm to it, and he delivers a vocal in his own way. And so, "Oh Babe, What I Say" is it's his biggest hit in the United States. It peaks actually at number 3 in the U.S. and will peak at 4 in the U.K. Hurricane Smith, however, would have a couple of other hits in the U.K. And would actually sell a lot of records in the United Kingdom, but in the United States, this was sort of it. Now, in late February of 1973, Hurricane Smith made an appearance on The Tonight Show, Johnny Carson's Tonight Show. And so in the 70s in particular, The Tonight Show was probably the most important show for entertainers on American television. That if you made a appearance on The Tonight Show, then you were kind of a star. It kind of cemented you in a way as a player wherever you were, Hollywood, recording, whatever. That was a very big get. And so, Dave, I have a question for you. So Hurricane Smith appears on The Tonight Show on February 27th of 1973. I have seen the contract that Hurricane Smith signed with the producers of The Tonight Show. How much did Hurricane Smith receive for his appearance?
He received $15.
Well, it's a little more than 15. It's $290. $290. But nevertheless, it was a fairly memorable appearance. And as I recall, the Tonight Show host Johnny Carson thought he was an interesting performer and a good guy, and really liked the song. It's an unusual number. It harkens back again to the 20s. It sounds something more like something Rudy Valley would have recorded in 1925. But there you have it. It's 1973, and you have Norman Hurricane Smith with this kind of novelty-esque number. So let's listen to it now.
Yeah.
Yes, so baby, I know I could be so in love with you, and I know that I could make you love me too. And if I could only hear you say you do. But anyway,
Yowza, yowza, yowza. So there we have Hurricane Smith at number 10 with Oh Babe, What I Say.
Reminds me a little bit of like McCartney's Honey Pie.
Yeah, it's like
sort
that.
of thing, right?
It's very much like that. And so and they're well, interestingly, right, that they were pals, I guess, at one time. It does have that sense. So let's cherry pick a little bit from the rest of the chart in mid-January of 73. At number 12, you've got that crazy band from England, Wings.
Speaking of Paul McCartney.
Speaking of Paul McCartney, Hi, Hi, Hi at number 12.
Yeah, Hi, Hi, Hi was a double A single with Sea Moon. Was released on December 1st, 1972 on Apple. Peaked at number 1 in Spain, number 5 in the United Kingdom. And I believe number 12 is as high as it got in America. One of the things that helped it, as always, is that the BBC banned it. So when the BBC bans a song in England, it's bound to sell more copies than it would otherwise. It was banned for its sexually suggestive lyrical content. I mean, Cashbox described it as, quote, good old rock and roll as only the McCartneys can perform it, but with lyrics that more than suggest. So it's these lyrics that more than suggest that got to the BBC. And of course, the title phrase, Hi, 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 seemed to be a drug reference. We're going to get high, high, high. So the specific lyrics that they objected to is the phrase, get you ready for my body gun. McCartney said, the actual lyrics are, get you ready for my polygon, an abstract image. But he later said, quote, the BBC got some of the words wrong, but I suppose it is a bit of a dirty song if sex is dirty and naughty. I was in a sensuous mood in Spain when I wrote it. End quote. And then he talks about performing it live. He says, quote, yeah, well, the great laugh is that when we go live, it makes a great announcement. You can say, this one was banned. And everyone goes, hooray! The audience love it, you know. This next one was banned. And then you get raving because everyone likes to. Everyone's a bit anti all that banning, all that censorship. Our crew, our generation, really doesn't dig that stuff, as I'm sure you know, end quote. So the band, of course, Paul McCartney on vocals, rhythm guitar, and bass. Linda McCartney credited with the co-writing credits on backing vocals and organ. Denny Lane, of course, on backing vocals and rhythm guitar. And Henry McCullough on lead guitar, and Denny Sywell on drums, and the cowbell.
Yes, and the cowbell. So this is the Wings band. This is Wings sort of pre band on the run. So famously, Sidewell and McCullough will leave the band when McCartney and goes to Lagos to record it, and I think that's the EMI studios in Lagos, and they want no part of it. But this, I mean, some people think, Wings aficionados think that this is the best version of Wings. This is the best, this was the tightest and hottest band. I mean, it's a bit of a throwaway number, to be candid. It's,
I think that's a hard argument to make when you look at Band on the Run.
Well, Band on the Run was essentially a solo effort. I mean, I would argue that it's largely a solo effort. Now we'll get a chance to kick this around soon, but this is the initial incarnation of Wings. But I mean, where does High stand on? I mean, for you, what in terms of McCartney songs, Wings songs from the 70s?
Well, it was kind of a throwaway. I mean, it wasn't even on an album until much later. It was just released as a single.
Yeah.
It was just kind of one of these things that McCartney does. Just
yes.
kind of having fun, in a mood, and going with it. And if there's one thing that Paul McCartney does not do with his music is overthink it. And I think that's one of the things that
That's
really
exactly
works
right.
for him.
That's
I think
exactly
that
right.
works for him extremely well. And even though it's not one of his great songs, it's a good song, right?
And this is right. I'd agree. I mean, this is the thing is that he's in a mood. He and Linda put something together in Spain, whatever. But but the thing is that he has this innate ability, and suddenly, it's a hit. I mean, he just almost couldn't help himself on some level. I mean, lots of artists were writing songs in praise of, getting high in this era, but not very many of them were making the charts. Well, it's McCartney. That's what he does.
Well, and if you think about his early career, they were just tossing this shit off. They were just tossing one song after another.
That's right.
And find a nice little rhyme scheme, and then they had a song, and they were getting famous and adored internationally for this stuff. Pre-Yesterday, pre-Norwegian Wood, Let It Be, all that stuff. So if anyone knows, you really don't have to put a lot of work into a song in order to have a hit. Paul McCartney is that person.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think what you said a minute ago about he was never one to overthink it, I think is absolutely the case. It's a classic example of it.
Won't say bye, 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 till the night is gone. I'm gonna do it to you, gonna do it, say banana, but never give up. We get high, 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 in the midday sun.
Well, I'm going to disappoint you here, Steve, and cut that off a little bit early.
Well, the most important thing is that Linda got a writing credit, and it worked for him. So there we have it at 12. Wings with High, High, High. A couple others if we could. At number 17, you've got the Raspberries from Cleveland with I Want to Be With You. And this is, people who enjoy power pop will think, will extol the virtues of the Raspberries. Many people consider them the greatest power pop band, maybe of all time, or certainly one of the greatest. And they, of course, were dominated by Eric Carmen, who was sort of the face of the band. He was the lead singer. He wrote virtually all of the material. And I think you could really see it, the Raspberries, as a kind of, they really were in service to Carmen. But that being said, this is another one of those kind of power pop gems. It peaks at number 16. And I think it's fair to say that the Raspberries are beginning to, they're beginning to fade. Or maybe another way of thinking about it is that Carmen's beginning to want to, he's getting the itch to go solo. The band will implode in a couple of years. Carmen will go solo in 75 and have immediate success with All By Myself at 75, which gets to number 2. And he'll have a number of other hits, solo hits in the 1970s and early 1980s. But again, I Want to Be With You is, again, a kind of power pop gem. Now, it is 1973, and it's a different era. And so if you look at the lyrics, read the lyrics, it is a little unsettling. If we were older, we wouldn't have to be worried about tonight. If you believe what we're doing is right, then close your eyes and be still. Oh, there we go. It's not, it puts it on the table, I guess. It's not particularly subtle. There's something about this that is, maybe doesn't exactly.
And in crass contrast to their first big hit, which was just very, very subtle and
that's right, so nuanced.
Nuanced. Please Go All the Way. Yes,
I think so maybe a bit of a one-trick pony. Nevertheless, it's an interesting trick, and again, they came together, and when they played, they sounded great. And so let's listen to the opening licks from I Want to Be With You.
Yes, let's.
If we were older, we wouldn't have to be worried tonight. Baby, oh, I wanna be with you so bad. I wanna be with you, oh baby, I wanna be with you, oh yeah. I wanna be with you.
Sort of almost Beatlesque harmonies there at some point. So there you have it at number 17 this week in January of 1973. Raspberries, I Want to Be With You. The last song we want to talk about today, again, Three Dog Night, who we both have great affection for. And Three Dog Night here at number 21 with Pieces of April.
Pieces of April. Interestingly, this is from the Seven Separate Fools. The Seven Separate Fools, we assume, are the members of the band. We have Danny Hutton on vocals, Corey Wells on vocals, Chuck Negron on vocals. These are in my head. This was always, these guys were Three Dog Night, right? Because they're the ones you saw, they're the ones you heard, and the fact that Three Dog Night was actually a band.
Yes, they were a band.
Was never
Yes.
really part of my consciousness. But you have Michael Alsop on guitar, Jimmy Greenspoon keyboards, Joe Shermy on bass, and Floyd Sneed on drums. So there's seven separate fools. Now, this is like the second song, or the second single anyway, that Three Dog Night put out that only had one of the singers singing. This is Chuck Negron, right?
Yeah.
Danny Hutton and Corey Wells had left London where they were doing the recordings before this was recorded. So, in a very unusual thing, we didn't have any of the Three Dog Night harmonies that we're used to, but a very nice, very popular ballad. A lot of people really like it. Producer was Richard Podolor, who essentially produced everything.
That's right.
Three Dog Night did. And this was released October 1972 on Dunhill. It didn't get any higher than number 19. So got a couple spots higher than it is this week. But okay, it broke the top 20.
It broke the top 20.
That's the best way to say it.
Yeah. It's a bit of a deep cut for Three Dog Night, but aficionados really, I mean, tremendous fondness for this song. I mean, it really is considered one of their best.
Well, and of course, it's on their greatest hits compilation,
right?
And it made it up to number 6 on the easy listening charts.
Sure,
right. So there's that. Interestingly, it was written by Dave Loggins.
Mm-hmm.
Dave Loggins is probably best known for his composition "Please Come to Boston," 1974. And he was inducted into the Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame in 1995. He's the second cousin of Kenny Loggins, who we were talking about earlier.
That's exactly right.
Although they had never met until later on in their professional careers, which I find interesting.
Yeah. Not at a family reunion or something like that, but right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he wrote Pieces of April. He'd also written material for Tanya Tucker, Wynonna Judd, Reba McEntire, Billy Ray Cyrus. You start to get the feeling that you know why he was in the Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame.
That's right.
Toby Keith, Crystal Gale, Kenny Rogers, Juice Newton.
Absolutely.
He recorded a duet with Anne Murray in 1984.
Yep.
Nobody Loves Me Like You Do. So Loggins,
Yeah.
Loggins and Murray were named the vocal duo of the year at the CMA Awards during 1985. Loggins and Murray, not Loggins and Messina.
That's right. But Anne Murray, who again, as we mentioned earlier, right, recorded Danny's song written by Kenny Loggins. But I think many people consider the Pieces of April one of Negron's finest vocals as a member of Three Dog Night. It's extraordinarily poignant. I mean, he really nails it. He really nails it.
Yeah, let's go ahead and listen to that.
I've got pieces of April. I keep them in a memory bouquet. I've got pieces of April. It's a morning in May. We stood on the crest of summer.
All right.
Yeah, Pieces of April,
April.
Chuck Negron. Yeah,
Chuck
so there you have it. So the hits from coast to coast, I guess, mid-January 1973. Again, as always, a real varied set of songs. I mean, it's what an era. So Dave, why don't you take us home?
Well, if you liked this video, and we hope you did, please subscribe, which you can do right here, or watch another one, which you can do right here. And as always, cannot recommend strongly enough, check out the playlist, all this great stuff on one playlist, which you'll find right here.
Absolutely. And as always, we'll include a reading list with this so you can dig a little bit deeper into the artists, producers, engineers that we've mentioned. And keep in mind that we tweet each day. Stephen Daves 1 on Twitter, Stephen Daves 1. And so until next month, we'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.